Hello and welcome, all my ATS homies. We're here for another edition of ATS Fully Engaged Battlefield Walkarounds. Today we're going to look at the module Stonne Heights, the Battle of France, 1940. This is the 2016 edition. There was originally a 2007, and this is the second one with the same name. As the name implies, or as the subtitle implies, the Battle of France, 1940. We're dealing with Case Yellow, when the Germans crossed the Meuse and through Belgium and got into France and surprised the French, and they all fought over a little town called Stonne. There's a couple other games. There's at least a TCS title. There's of course an ASL version from Critical Hit. There's probably some other games that depict this this action or this situation. It's actually pretty interesting in that this tiny little town changed hands 17 times before the battle was over. So it was Germans attacking and then French counterattacking and so on and so forth ad nauseum until, of course, the Germans eventually captured the town and captured all of France. So let's look at the module now. We'll remove this. This is the insert for the Ziploc, of course, and this actually has the Battlefield Walkaround on the inside. So there it is, which has designer's notes. I appreciate that a lot. I kind of suspect they're not complete, that the original was probably longer because they kind of just end. So there's probably another little page or another couple paragraphs that they didn't want to put on, but that's okay. I'm happy to have any designer's notes. I don't love having the Battlefield Walkaround or other important game information on the inside of the insert because it makes it more difficult. Especially with ATS products, I back up everything, and not all games, but for things like that where it's very difficult if you lose something or something gets damaged to replace it. So it makes it more kind of a pain in the ass to scan, but that's not the end of the world. And so you got that Battlefield Walkaround, of course. We'll take a little look at the counters. There are 4 counter sheets. We have German AFVs, 1940s, early war, and baton extras. Why not? There's some Japanese tanks, and I guess those are probably Marine. It doesn't matter. We're not talking about that right now. So lots of early Panzer IIs. We've got very, very wimpy weapons. I mean, there's a 25A gun right there. 25 millimeters. I don't know what I'm going to do with a 25 millimeter gun. It's nice to have an A-class gun, but you've got an observation plane, the HS-126. I have no idea what that designation stands for, but there are a couple scenarios where you get to use an observation plane to spot artillery, which is cool. So lots of wimpy tanks. The French actually have the good tanks. And this is, in fact, the only time that the Bis 1 faced off against the Germans. So this makes it a good historical situation if you like your early war tanks. So there they are. You can see these ones have the sponson. Pretty sure it's a sponson, but they definitely have 2 guns, the 47C and then the Bow 75C, which at this point is far better than most of all the other weapons. You can, as you can see, a lot of 37s, 25s, 20s. Ugh. No. Okay. And then you just have generic French and German infantry. The Germans being slightly better. There's the FAB. The FAB is, as we discovered, I want to say that's Fusil Anti-Char Boys. That's the Boys anti-tank rifle. That's actually British, but that the French used. There's some confusion about the range, whether that should be 12 or 16. Sometimes you'll see it as 12, sometimes 16, because the Boys is quite underpowered compared to some of the other ATRs. And the cool thing is, I'm a big fan of ATRs, which is silly, but there it is. If you follow ATSFE, you might know that. So this is one of those early war situations where you can actually do something with your ATRs, which is cool. Yeah. And here's not the French, the Germans. So they're just generic, regular Germans. Yeah, good stuff. You do get some combat engineers that just use normal squads, but they are combat engineers per SSSR, which is nice for blowing up tanks and melee. It's cool. We've got 3 AFV cards. There's 2 of them. I mean, if you play TS, you know what AFV cards look like. They're all pretty full. There's one more lying around that I won't bother showing. And then you've got 16, hot damn, 16 scenarios on 8 cards. Just to prove it. There's number 16, the final wave. So lots of scenarios, a lot of action going on. We'll go over the scenarios a little bit later. They all say version 1.4. I don't know, up there at the top. I don't know to what degree that was the original designer. Oh, I forgot to mention the original designer. The original designer is, I never know how to say his name. I mean, I'll say it like with an American accent, Pedro Ramis. I'm pretty sure he's Belgian. He's done a bunch of ATS and ASL stuff. Bunch of stuff, more than I had realized. I mean, that looks like a Spanish name. I want to say Pedro Ramis, but if he's Belgian, then I would say Pedro Ramis. So I don't know. I never know what to say. But yeah, he's a pretty prolific ATS designer, which is cool. So, and he visited the battlefield multiple times and did a lot of research as it goes over in the designer notes, which is always good to see. Very cool stuff. So again, I don't know what when it says version 1.4, I don't know to what degree, how many of those were his versions, how many of those were Ray's adding stuff in, changing stuff later, etc. But yeah, these are, this is the original module is quite old, pretty old, 2007, and pretty well loved. So it's probably seen a lot of playing, a lot of tweaking, which is always nice. The map, get right to the map. We've got 6 map panels, and with really big hexes, because it looks like a huge map, but it really isn't. It's 2 by 3, and the hexes are, I don't know how they measure hexes when they say, these hexes are 1 inch or whatever. But I memeasured them side to side, and they're 1.5 inch. And if you measure them from vertex to vertex, they're almost 1 3/4. So I don't have tons of table space. I probably would have preferred smaller hexes, but they are, that's what you get. So you got lots of buildings up here on top in the town, of course, top of the mountain. You get a very wide variety. So that level down there on the top right, where it's kind of the latest green, that's 0. Up here you get to 70. There's a little water tower there, which is kind of nifty. It's got some SSRs, or some specific rules for how that works. A lot of woods, of course, orchards. I mean, this is France, but this is no Normandy. You're not going to get the gentle rolling hills. It's very steep inclines. In fact, there's some special rules for blind hex formation, which I'm pretty sure create a lot more blind hexes. Basically, kind of, if you go, adjusting the camera, which maybe, yeah, there we go. It's lopsided, but that's okay. We'll show other things on the camera. Basically, if they're obstacle or things that would be obstacles, even though you could normally see over them, they'll still create some blind hexes. So you get a lot more difficult terrain. And there's some special scenario rules, module rules about crawling. You become winded if you crawl up something that takes more than your assault movement allowance, which is interesting. Makes it harder to move around when you're going uphill and such. And what else? There's barbed wire fence. I guess we'll move this and try this one more time, which isn't there, all up in there. It's not too big of a deal. It's not like it's not military grade concertina wire or whatever. It's probably just to keep cows from wandering off. Yeah, but there are immobilization checks for wheeled vehicles. Speaking of cows, for wheeled vehicles as well, and you can't run across it. So it's it's there. And there's a lot of rubble, not on the map, but most, if not all, the scenarios involve rubble. Although the rubble per SSR is light rubble, whatever that means. I guess it's opposed to heavy rubble. Anyways, instead of having the whole hex covered by rubble, you have just the building art count as the rubble, which is actually cool. I kind of like that better. And it makes sense for a small village, not a huge urban, built-up, dense area. So that's it for the components. It has VAT support. We do have VAT support. This is there. You can play this with your friends or your enemies online on virtual ATS. Let's just look at a few cool things before we go over the scenarios. We talked about the French tanks being better than the German tanks, which is interesting because the Germans are always known for having the super awesome tanks. So it's nice to see that the tables being turned there. And there are a couple. We'll go right to. I guess we'll go right to the scenarios. There are a couple scenarios that are one side. I think it's always the French only have tanks, but 2 to 6 or something like that, and which is kind of cool. That's not the kind of thing you want to play every single time, but it is interesting to see, especially if it's like late war, having a Tiger against a bunch of squads or something like that. And there are some other counters. I guess if you're a long-time ATSer, this won't be that cool, but I like to see motorcycles with sidecars. Bam! BMW R75s. I don't actually think I saw this in the module, but maybe I just missed it. I mean, there were 16 scenarios, and I looked through them all, but there's 16 scenarios, so I might have missed it. And I think we actually talked about a lot of the other counters already when we looked at the counter sheets. The observation planes and the wimpy guns and the fab. We did not talk about some of the other additional rules. There's tank fright, because troops aren't used to fighting tanks yet. It's the beginning of the war. And basically morale checks. They don't break, but if they miss their morale check, they get pinned down. Oh, and they're funny. They do mention pin down markers, which I was looking on a counter sheet, and I thought they were ASL markers from So Full of Fire, which is the Brecourt Manor action with the Band of Brothers one that everyone knows about that way. And there's some ASL leaders for some reason on that marker sheet, on the counter sheet, and then there are. I should have brought the counter sheet over. And then there are pinned markers, which I was like, okay, it must be an ASL thing. But then the rules specifically mention using them. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's cool. So they're useful. What else? French tank cohesion. That's another rule where tanks can't move by themselves, or they have to make a roll. Otherwise, not a great roll, like a 40% chance to be able to move by themselves. Otherwise, they have to move in a tank platoon, and if they miss their roll, then they're just marked as cross-country moves, so they're stuck and can't fire, which is not the greatest. There's one other rule which I'm not sure about. So they mention FM gunners, which is surely something with mitrailleuse, I don't know, but they're supposed to be BAR gunners. They're 258s and they follow the same rules. Now if you look at the counter sheet, get some nice glare. There are no 258 BAR looking mofos in there, or FM gunners. So then I was curious, and I looked through all the scenarios, and there's not a single scenario with an FM gunner, which is good because there aren't any on the counter sheet. So yeah, I assume that was something they had in the original module, and then they changed it. But that strikes me as very odd. That seems like the kind of thing that would get added in later, and not that the original designer would not have wanted, and then would get, then Critical Hit would add it in a later edition. But it's actually the opposite. So I'd be very curious to see the original, and to see what those counters look like, and to see how the scenarios changed. I mean, as we talked about version 1.4, surely in the original versions there were FM gunners, at least in some scenarios. I guess they changed them out for squads or MGs, or just kept it the same. But like whatever, it's just a one SP counter. Who cares? So, and speaking of counters, we didn't talk about what's missing and what's there. As far as I can tell, it's all there. So this is a complete module, other than, of course, the normal caveat. You need the rules, you need the dice, you need the small and large markers. You do need both, because there's rubble and foxholes. You need the large ones, and levels. And actually, the buildings don't have levels, except for the water tower. Okay, so you do need levels, but there you go. And not too many. But yeah, as far as combat counters go, as far as I could tell, everything was there in terms of squads and tanks. And again, 16 scenarios, so I didn't look through every single counter, but I just checked the ones like, when there were 12 squads or 15 squads, and made sure there were enough of those, and 6 tanks or 6 bis one, so those are all there. So that is good news. As for the scenarios, it's a pretty good mix of small, medium, and large. There are a couple small ones. There's nothing huge, but there are a couple that are quite sizable. Lots of stuff on the map. And then I think probably most of them are medium, maybe. Although it's a good balance. There's a good amount of air support and quite a bit of OBA, off-board artillery. There's a couple cool scenarios. There's one with guarding prisoners, where the French are guarding German prisoners, and they can actually, if they take people speeding down the street, if they take casualties, they can actually apply them to the prisoners. The prisoners don't go on the map, but there's like a little checkbox of the 4 steps for the prisoners on the scenario card itself, which is pretty nifty. If I could find it immediately, I'll show it. Hooray! There it is. The prisoners guarding squad ID, prisoner step. So you could just copy that and print that out and have that with you. And yeah, I think that's it. That is Stonne Heights. So if I get a chance to play it soon, I will do a video of playing it. And yeah, and if you have any questions, hit us up in the comments and all our other STFE related media empire places. Have a good one.